So yeah, thank you for the introduction. And indeed, I'm focusing a bit on the interplay between security and privacy, though I mostly consider myself a privacy person. Nevertheless, I was really happy to hear everything that Tanya was saying in the previous presentation, because there's so much overlap with security and privacy. And you will actually see that I will be touching up on some of the takeaways she also mentioned, but then for privacy. So yeah, let's get started. Compliance, that's a very big topic in the privacy world. I'm not the biggest fan. I think compliance is highly overrated. We are approaching privacy too much from that checkbox approach, trying to get the DPO or the lawyer or whoever to sign off on getting all those rules, while well, the goal of the GDPR, of the privacy regulations that are popping up across the world, the goal of that of those regulations are actually to make privacy respecting and secure systems products. And having a lawyer checking off a couple of boxes is not gonna make that happen. What we need is to actually build those systems, those products, in a privacy respecting and secure way. And to do that, well, we need to have privacy engineering like we also have security engineering. We really need to build in privacy at the core at engineering time. So yeah, giving this statement, as you might expect, I do not have a legal background, which makes me a bit of an odd one in the privacy world. I actually have a security computer science background. I have a lot of interest in threat modeling, so you will see me touch upon that later too. And I'm currently, indeed, as introduced earlier by Tristan, Cyber Privacy Manager at PwC Belgium, where I have the very interesting job to focus on that interaction between security and privacy. Now, before we get started, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with some very messed up animations here. And make sure that you all understand what I mean when I talk about privacy. So privacy is not a synonym for confidentiality. Privacy engineering has, similar to security, also a number of goals. So security has CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. Privacy also has a triad, which is unlinkability, intervenability, and transparency, or disassociability, manageability, and predictability, if you prefer the US terminology. I don't have time to go into detail of all of these, but I just wanted to highlight that it's definitely not a synonym for confidentiality. It's about minimization. It's about de-identification. It's about providing control and transparency to the individuals whose data you're processing. Now, that being said, it's important to also point out that that's also an often mistake, that privacy engineering is just something that you can do, or privacy is something you can fix by just throwing in some PETs, privacy enhancing technologies. That's not just these cute puppies, but that's de-identification techniques, crypto stuff, that kind of thing. They are very important too. They will be useful, but I kind of consider them as the last resort, something we need to implement if we have no other options, but we need to start by looking at those initial problems and try to tackle them earlier. That's also what these definitions say. I'm not going to read them out. Basically, there's a couple of definitions about what is privacy engineering, and it goes way beyond, well, it's actually a very broad domain, privacy engineering, but it goes very much beyond having those specific solutions, but it's also about those early phases where you fix privacy upfront, the shift left or start left approach for privacy as well. And then we have the DPOs, the privacy professionals, who say, well, that's fine, privacy engineers, why are you complaining? We don't need that stuff because we have acronyms. We have DPIAs. That's a very big thing in Europe. That's something, a data protection impact assessment, something you need to do in certain situations when you have new projects that have potential to violate individuals' privacy, when you are processing lots of data, sensitive data, that kind of thing. We also have privacy impact assessments or technical privacy reviews, legitimate interest assessments, transfer impact assessments, and we document everything in a ROPA or record of processing activities. So we're good to go. We don't need anything more. And that's great in theory, because indeed a DPIA is something you need to have done upfront. At project inception, you create a data protection impact assessment that will help you decide whether it's a viable product, feature, whatever, what the necessary controls are, and then you can implement that accordingly. Now, what actually happens often is that that DPIA is being conducted when the project is already up and running, or even when it's a couple of cycles beyond that. So while it was intended from a legislation perspective to be implemented early on and actually guide the development process, we see in practice that that's not working, and it's being considered as overhead, as something that those privacy people, those legal people are making us do, writing ugly documents. And we can do better, because the purpose, the original idea was great. And well, security can actually help us, because we have the same things in security as well. We also want to start left, and we also have security by design that we want to achieve. And then the security people tend to say, yeah, helping you privacy people, but privacy is so different. And, we already do security. And exactly, yay, we already do security. So let's use that, because privacy and security actually share the same foundation. They're not that different. They have a bit different angles, different views on what you need to look at, but in essence, they share a very similar foundation. So let's, instead of saying, well, it's a completely different thing, let's actually work together and align and integrate privacy in the secure development lifecycle. And well, I mentioned it before, I'm a big threat modeling advocate. So I think threat modeling is a great approach there that can help us, because it makes a lot of sense to do for security, and it makes equal amount of sense for privacy. So what is threat modeling? In essence, it means you are analyzing a system model, a system representation, and find security and privacy issues. And you can do that by basically answering these 4 questions that Adam Shostak described. So basically just thinking about, what are we working on, what can go wrong, what are we going to do about it, and did we do a good enough job? 4 very simple questions, but of course threat modeling is broader than that. You have a lot of frameworks that can help you. You also have a lot of knowledge that can help you, because if I ask you to just think about, okay, let's look at this system and let's brainstorm about security or privacy issues, that tends to be a bit tricky, right? Because you need to structure your train of thought. You need to know what you're actually looking for. And that's why there are a bunch of very interesting, useful taxonomies, knowledge bases out there, such as Stride for security threat modeling, and LINDDUN for privacy threat modeling. I'm biased because I created it, but I think it's pretty good. And the interesting thing here is that, well, LINDDUN, for instance, was inspired by Stride. So if you're already implementing security threat modeling, adding LINDDUN, for instance, on top of that really creates less or little overhead, because it uses the same process, the same approach. So it really works nicely together. That being said, threat modeling is more than just a way to think about issues. Well, it is a great approach to structure your DPIA or PIA, your privacy impact assessment. That's just a starting point, right? It really will drive your security and privacy development lifecycle steps, because it will tell you what you're actually looking at, what you want to fix, and that's the information you can use in the subsequent steps. And in addition, it will help you to bring privacy back into engineering. It was far too long part of GRC, of the legal people. We need to bring it back into engineering. And by actually tackling privacy here with threat modeling and bringing that together with security, we make that happen. Now, that being said, threat modeling is awesome, both for security and privacy. But will it fix everything? Well, of course not. Privacy engineering is still a bit of a new domain compared to security. There's still lots to learn, to explore. It needs to mature more. So there are still a couple of things we need to fix. For instance, well, let's take a bit of a detour. I don't know if you recognize this building. So this is the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. And well, it's very famous, and it has gotten a lot of praise by historians, by art critics, saying that this is one of the most amazing designs, incredible, fantastic designs that have ever been made. The design was made more than 100 years ago. Very fancy, very special. And also, it was the work started more than 100 years ago, but that amazing design, well, this is a quite recent picture, and the building still hasn't been finished. Because it was so amazing and fantastic, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort, and that might work when you're building a church, but that doesn't work for security, and it doesn't work for privacy. So I like to quote or misquote Isar here, and saying that we need to aim for reasonable privacy and not perfect privacy. Because I actually heard some people say, okay, well, this privacy story, this compliance story, I get it. I need to look into it. But, well, once I started to look into it, it didn't make that much sense anymore. It was just too overwhelming, and I decided to not do anything. And that's really a waste, right? So just start small. Just start by asking yourself, do I really need these data? Go from there, evolve, start, well, focus on reasonable. You don't have to make that whole perfect privacy program right away. Also, it's important to note that privacy is a quite complex thing. There's multiple layers that you need to analyze. You have the feature that you're building that you need to analyze, but that feature is part of a bigger ecosystem that also influences the privacy impact. But there's more than that. There's also the business layer, because that same feature used in a different business layer, in a different business context, will have very different privacy implications. A feature designed to analyze some medical-related pictures, health-related pictures, when that's in a business context at a hospital, providing care to patients, that's a completely different privacy story than that exact same feature analyzing health pictures for a social media app. And there's a broader environment there too that you need to take into account, because what is the target audience? Where do they live? What type of regulation holds there? What are their expectations? Maybe when you're targeting men, they have different expectations than women, or whatever. There's lots of different contexts there that you need to take into account, and that will have an impact on your privacy analysis. Another one. I don't know if you're familiar with this picture. It has been around on Reddit and stuff for a couple of years now. So this kid told his dad that he wants to train the puppy. And the dad said, well, check YouTube. There's lots of training videos for dogs there. So the kid did and showed it to the dog. So there was some miscommunication there. And that kind of aligns with a lot of stuff that's going on with privacy research more specifically. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on, lots of new technologies, solutions being developed, but it's often still very much focused on the foundational privacy work, and the usability is often forgotten. So it's great if you have this amazing privacy solution. If you're the only person who knows how to use it, it doesn't make sense. Again, misquoting a security quote here by Avi, privacy at the expense of usability is at the expense of privacy. Make sure that it doesn't just make sense for privacy, it's also usable, useful. People know how to apply it, people want to use it. So again, this is one of those things that Tanya was also saying, not just something for security, something that also applies to privacy. So yes, tools can help if we take into account that they can assist us. It will not be automation. Because, to quote the Threat Modeling Manifesto, we need to allow for creativity. So that means we have both a bit of craft and a bit of science. And of course, I need to mention AI. Yes, AI can help. But again, given that privacy is such a complex problem, we don't understand it. AI doesn't understand it either. So it can give some assistance, but it will not be able to fully automate a privacy analysis or a security analysis. So let's also talk about privacy controls, privacy solutions. So not just looking at, let's find the privacy problems. That's great if we find them. We also want to fix them. There is some work going on there. There's catalogs of patterns. There's some overviews of pets, not quite, but actually that's just a starting point because there's so much out there. What do we actually use? How can we know what we need to use? So there's still a lot of work there to be done. And then when we do know that, that ties back to the usability comment I gave before. How do we actually apply it? What are specific guidelines, specific guardrails for developers? How can we actually guide red teams to also look for privacy issues? There's bits and pieces popping up, but there's still a lot of work to do. Now, why am I talking about all of this at an AppSec conference? Well, because you can help. We're stronger together. There is this big overlap between security and privacy. They actually strengthen each other. I can talk for hours about how and why. It's not just that from a privacy perspective, we need confidentiality. From a security perspective, privacy can strengthen security as well. And given that security is a much more mature domain already, we can leverage that information. So here's a call to action to all of you. Use your security expertise, use your approaches, and apply them to privacy as well. When you threat model as a dev or in other stages of the development lifecycle, well, first of all, threat model every story. When you're threat modeling, don't just look at security, also look at privacy issues. When you're pen testing, again, the same. Look not just for security issues, look for privacy issues. They are available if there has been a privacy threat model or TPIA or whatever. If it's not available, well, threat model, because threat modeling is the answer to all questions, to all problems. Even when you're doing bug bounty hunting, also look for privacy violations. There's still plenty of issues out there, so point that out. Spread the awareness, make more noise about the privacy issues that are out there. So leverage your security expertise, your security approaches, and be a champion for privacy as well. Because, well, compliance is overrated and we need to do better. All right, that's it from my side. I don't know if there's any questions or comments.
Thank you, Kim. That was a great presentation, and it was my first introduction personally to privacy as engineering as well. And I'm always super all ears for everything related to engineering and new kind of engineering. There are questions. So one of the questions that I think are relevant, and everyone is asking, you know, right now IA is becoming big. Everyone is asking about IA, and that also causes a lot of privacy problems. So one of the questions that we had is what are the main privacy engineering challenges in IA products, and especially in light of, you know, the enactment of different regulations of different countries and organizations.
Yeah. So first of all, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going by what I read and what I hear. So this is not official legal advice. But actually, the AI Act is just a bit of an extension of GDPR. From a privacy perspective, there's not much more or more limiting in there than what needs to be done anyways. That being said, there are a bunch of privacy issues out there. I think one of the most interesting challenges, and I think we're mostly looking at the first rulings about this, is the right to be forgotten and how to handle that in LLM AI systems. Because if some information needs to be deleted,
Yeah.
does that mean that the system needs to be retrained? Because basically all that information is being included. Also, the latest rulings or advices say that, well, if the training data contains personal information, the model itself is also considered personal information, so it needs to be handled with additional care. The output will also, although de-identified, have a potential to contain personal information. So basically the whole AI ecosystem will be considered as personal, potentially sensitive personal data. So there needs to be a lot of care there on how to handle all of that. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see both the legislation and the technical measures evolve there, because this might be the one legislation that is ahead of time, because it sometimes calls out controls or mitigations that technically we don't actually know how to do it yet.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I guess like making an LLM, for instance, or a big, you know, like model, forget about specific personal data of one specific person requires kind of technology that we don't have yet. So this is what you said, right? We might have to retrain everything, or this is like a complicated set of technical problems that encompass both like privacy from a legal standpoint and also from a technical standpoint.
Yeah.
So there is another question. So do you need to call out specific privacy requirements for pen testing? So of course there are many people from a security background in the attendees. So I guess this is a
Yeah.
interesting question.
Well, I'm gonna give the typical consultancy answer here. It depends. Yeah, you really need to look at the specific context, and that's what makes privacy both interesting and tricky. There's no specific thing to always look for, but yeah, the typical things: aren't we using too much information? Do we really need all the information? When looking at what you promise you will use, aren't you using more information? Can an individual, so when I say individual, it can be a user, but it can also be a person whose information is being processed, but it's not necessarily a user. That might be an interesting one to look for. Is there actually any support for those other individuals to request access or information about their information and the processing thereof? But yeah, so from a pen testing perspective, I think mostly it will be about abuse of personal data. Isn't there too much information? can more information be deduced, be linked, that kind of thing. So again, looking at the triads, it's unlinkability, transparency, and control. I think from a pen testing perspective, it will be mostly about unlinkability, which is about minimization, and control, which is about what can an individual actually do. And if you allow an individual to remove information or to ask for updates, that might cause security issues and vice versa. So again, there's that interesting interplay between security and privacy.
And on my end, I had a personal question regarding this and regarding pen test specifically. So when you're pen testing for security problems, right? You find XSS or you created denial of service, it's very easy to notice that you created a bug and that this shouldn't happen. But for privacy that is driven by legal, compliance things, will the pen tester need to undergo also privacy, training to understand if they are in a situation where there is a privacy concern, or is it possible to just, feel that there is a problem?
Yeah. I think there will be. I'm not saying that all the support is there yet. Also, I want to clarify that it's not just from the legal perspective, it's really coming from the privacy engineering perspective, not necessarily from the compliance perspective. But yeah, it's going to be less easy to find because it's very much based on the specific data and the specific context. Because, yeah, as I said before, it might depend on the business context. It might be okay to process medical information in a health in a hospital context, but it might not be okay if you're Facebook and you want to share I don't know, some x-rays from a president or something, because the purpose is different and the data might be sensitive or different. So it really depends on what data you're processing. Is that an x-ray of a president, or is that a random picture of a dog? It might be processing of pictures, but the context is very different. So that makes it tricky, I think, to give very specific guidelines. So I think that's a very interesting problem still to fix from a privacy engineering perspective, and that will hopefully quickly get into the overall engineering process with guardrails and paved roads and all that kind of stuff like we have for security.
So in a way, what you would be saying is that we will need even more business understanding of the context, the business, what it is all about, and what kind of data or who owns the data when we are pen testing and when we're doing like red teaming activities.
Yeah, exactly. From a security perspective, the business context is a nice bonus. From a privacy perspective, it's kind of the way around. You need that business context and then also look at the technical part.
That's a very interesting way to see it. Well, Kim, thank you for your presentation. Someone asked in the chat, I see, if the presentation will be available. I guess there is no problem with sharing your presentation, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you, everyone. There were like more than 70 people watching the recording today and more in the future. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and let's stay